Hello everyone, today we briefly introduce the history of artillery. As you notice, this is definitely not my first video about artillery in general. We've made lots of them here. I pinned at the top of say the comment sections to illustrate in fact all the especially medieval artillery videos as I focus on that era. But of course we are expanding a bit more, especially in the modern period, meaning until the Napoleonic Wars that we also covered, but not to that level of detail. In fact, there is something about Napoleonic artillery made, but I plan to expand also in 19th, say further in 19th century and 21st century warfare as well, hopefully soon. So I make these videos to just give a bit more of glue to this various others based on different eras and different polities, etc. So that, and artillery types and whatever, and introducing, generally speaking, the concept. That is an interesting mental exercise because it sort of brings you to define the theory of this, but also the technological dimension that matters, especially in this case, in the development of the arm, and how, of course, and especially that being the most important thing, how the doctrine evolved in the art of war. So it would be a lot to say. There is all up, for example, Pike and Shot series, in which I criticize heavily, as you know, the concept of the military revolution that would never actually happened historically. It took an incredibly long time before gunpowder technology surpassed, for example, the convenience of equipping troops with pikes, essentially with cold steel, and half of a millennium to be precise. But there is also an interesting aspect about the history of artillery proper that we will observe today, and that sometimes leaves you a bit, shocked. That is, the fundamentals in artillery development were fundamentally established already in the Middle Ages, and they wouldn't really change that much over time. Like especially the 15th, the 16th century, okay, the Renaissance, mostly fundamentally laid the role that we still run today, right? Of course, in a dramatically more advanced, complex, and sort of materially extensive context, but that hasn't really changed much. Even if you look at, rifles performance and whatever, like it's not that it really changed too much. For example, from the early 20th century, right? We like to think of ourselves naturally clothed in this bubble of hyper-technological reality, but even though technology, of course, plays an important role in warfare, we tend to miss conceptually, and also in the hard sense, what concretely lays at the basis, and in other words, the still very primitive way that we make war technically, right? Then we will, of course, this is a heavy statement, as you know, and of course, it goes in line with the criticism of the military revolution. It's something more contained with these phrases I expanded dramatically to a never-ending series of possible debates and discussions, and that it's obviously a provocation of some sort. But I promise that, time allowing, we will cover many aspects of also current warfare. And so we skip specifically that criticism now regarding the concept of the revolution, and especially the idea that gunpowder firearms would have essentially revolution, in fact, the entire art of war. That's technically not what happened. The best way of seeing this is essentially seeing this technology grafting on an art of war, on a military system that, of course, allowed to integrate successfully such new means, but that was very gradual in its further development, and that, of course, was carried overall by many other currents within the same military system, of course. And then you always have to go back to the political and social roots of these changes. Because as we will see now, of course, it's not even gunpowder as such that really made the development of firearms, meaning that the composition of gunpowder was available really from quite a long time, right? Also probably in fireworking and more, but that is often an overlooked topic today. We will perhaps not address to the fullest, but why did this thing evolve into a sound military purpose in the 13th century, right? So nobody knows, of course, what's the first cannon shot in history. We can't trace specific, say, more famous contexts, battles, documents in which we see, of course, artillery being used, let's say, for the first time. It's better, of course, to call it for what it is, like the first time this is mentioned, right? And there is no doubt, aside from, again, sensationalism and fireworks in the sense of the term military revolution, it surely sells, on the market, but it's not really accurate. But these weapons did make an important impression in the art of war. I actually dedicated, as you know, multiple videos in explaining this, like how the introduction of these weapons was seen, right, in a, of course, in a simplistic way as, this gun is an implementation, also of some essentially cowardly way of war that had always been considered like that in hitting the enemy at a distance and not actually going, properly into hand-to-hand combat and confrontation. All peoples in Eurasia were, say, at least from the civilized ones, were quick to adopt these firearms, even in the cultures that were sort of more historically chivalric and adverse in the sense to this kind of chthonic dimension rising, not just as the firearm, but also like as commoners, as this new power entrusted to essentially individuals that, in a Promethean way, that would not deserve, that would cause chaos. This is an interesting way of seeing the firearms in the political, for example, religious background of the time. Think about the Renaissance, the Reformation. We tend to see this, the early modern era as a moment of great positivity and spirit of, of almost evolution, of progress of some sort, whereas the contemporaries actually saw these very centuries, the peak of the Renaissance, as one of the most nightmarish, dramatic, critical, and violent, and evil, properly, that had ever existed. So, yes, we did project on these centuries some sort of positivistic, modernistic light, right, or darkness, if you prefer, given that, so of course there was something teleological seen in the rise of firearms, of large masses equipped with this, and so on, for, of course, political reasons pertaining mostly to other centuries, the 18th to 19th, right? And in any case, in fact, firearms were considered part of this, like an instrument of the devil, the trumpet of the devil, as they were called. And naturally, in order to understand actually what was going on, you have to appreciate the human ingenuity behind this technology. In fact, not much gunpowder in itself, right? Surely these weapons began literally, there was a race in making them ever more lethal, right? Destining them to roar more and more frequently in all regions of Asia and Europe, right? It seems that psychologically, in combat, after the literal first times that these weapons were used, that wasn't actually a great impression that they made. In fact, I actually studied myself in my place, right? For I do specialize exactly in early 14th century warfare, when we have the first actual evidence of regular employ firearms, which did not really, in fact, make this great exception, right? The fact that they were introduced as other weapons, and they were just another way to kill, and they didn't impress more than other weapons that were still more effective, and in fact more widespread, right? It's like the idea of, I don't know how long did trebuchet continue being used till the end of the Middle Ages. Same goes for crossbows, etc. They all coexisted with guns, right? And so they, aside from the explosive metaphor of the cannon, of the trumpet of the devil, etc., as all technologies, this thing was introduced very gradually and wasn't making even that particular impression. There are other contexts, like, I don't know, think about the conquest of the Americas, when literally there you arrived to use these weapons, or just to ride on horseback among peoples that had never seen that, so that was surely more shocking, right? But it's like saying, what do you prefer, being shot or gassed? Like, there is no easy answer to that. In fact, also most contemporary weapon ban convention are sort of morally debatable, in the sense that the way humans kill each other is not really that. You can't quite say like this is worse than that, right? It depends on the circumstance, and it's generally some broader political or social, economical interest that makes this or that weapon conventionally banned, and still they're used in many ways. I'm much more liberal as far as that is concerned, because in war, in any case, any mean is employed, right, regardless for limitations. Otherwise, you're in front of constant cheat, and you cannot quite do much about that. In politics, primarily, then war is just a reflection of that. So, from Eurasia, firearms spread around the world. Today we talk specifically about artillery, by the way, and there was definitely a race starting from there that is sort of more epiphenomenally evident than the one that was going on already between, I don't know, the crossbow and the pike and the cavalry charge and more, but that we can sort of understand technologically today, when that, in fact, scientific development is sort of more, and especially application of this knowledge is much faster, much more accelerated. And so still in the era of satellites and nuclear weapons, you cannot say that, in fact, the same race for improving your guns is over. It's not, right? It's continuously ongoing, right? There are different technologies, things are, getting different directions, but the substance, right, of shooting, of shelling, bombarding the enemy is pretty much the same, and we are pursuing that in pretty much also, again, very similar ways than in the past, and also similar among each other, because we haven't quite surpassed most of that, right, at least in conventional warfare. So the invention of gunpowder is inextricably connected with, as we were saying before, first of all, why did this thing come to be used for military purpose? And that's a hell of a question. And again, we can't quite simply answer in this video. It is more comprehensive of artillery history. But it gets down, of course, also to the chemical mixture of saltpeter, charcoal, and sulfur. The combination of which, in the right proportions, is really lost in the mists of history, right? Some say that the Chinese, for example, had already some very similar incendiary, mostly, at least as an effect, mixtures at their disposal before the year 1000. But in fact, they were more similar to fireworks than gunpowder based on saltpeter, which doesn't mean, by the way, that the Chinese used this for non-military purpose mostly. They did, but evidently they were seeking for something more flammable than explosive, and it is true that even when Europeans start developing this artillery, especially in the 13th century, when, as you know, the Pax Mongolica had kept open the contacts between Europe and China, and there were lots, but I mean lots of Europeans living in China as a consequence. At that point, of course, Europe began to make more use of these weapons. I'm actually very skeptical towards any kind of idea that weapons simply develop because a people copies them from another because they didn't know before. This evolution was going on within the same China, and you see that Eurasia developed artillery pretty much around the same time at the end of the day. But it is true that Europeans made a more explosive use of this mixtures than the Chinese, that kept using them mostly for incendiary purposes. But what the deal is, maybe the fact that China, it may be something banal to say, but think about how encapsulated Europe was. I mean, just the fact that it was all politically, it's not that Europe was less cohesive than China as a civilization. As a matter of fact, I would actually think the contrary. But the reason being exactly that it seems to a dimension, of course, more politically fragmented, because every single place had its own little army, fortress, and they would start having, in fact, their artillery park in a while. And you need more boom, right? You need more either smashing power or literal mining, whatever. Whereas China, being this sort of crystallized empire, this time very dynamic still, like, of course, the greatest power in terms of absolute extension, namely, having actually much less of a feudal society and sort of a narrower elite that ruled over sort of almost disarmed masses of peasants just working in rice paddies, and in that sense not having the same fortification, for example, needs, and therefore strategical ones as well, to make more use of such explosives or make use of artillery in the first place. You see, that's the impression that matured over time. We are continuing with our series about Chinese warfare, and more or less like actually Central East Asian warfare on Schwerpunkt, and we will be covering these things, the various Chinese imperial dynasties, and so on. If you're interested, you can check out the Mongol history playlist as well, because there we discuss how artillery also spread in the steppes, right? How, again, having artillery is not really the hallmark, having this technology in itself of a particular civilizational development. As a matter of fact, it spreads immediately everywhere. It's just like the development in armor. If you look at Europe, you can say that the most underdeveloped fringes of Northern or Eastern Europe were devoid of the most updated designs, or that they wouldn't have in this case, artillery available. We've seen it, for example, in the medieval Scottish army organization, that every lord had, their small castle had some sort of artillery. By the same time, the greater powers in Europe were in fact forming those real parks, as we will see now. So again, these are not questions I can answer in just one video, just give you a broader take, but then we need more food for thought. But getting back to the chemicals, the aforementioned mixture is mostly based on salt, right? It is saltpeter that really contributes to the compound with its oxidizing qualities. So what, in other words, provides the oxygen necessary for the finely ground charcoal to burn so quickly as to produce an explosion. This is the most important thing. And as we will see now, saltpeter was also the most, in fact, costly, like also the sort of more difficult to produce, to find element of the mixture of all. And there were limits, in fact, even industrially, to the provisioning of such material. In any case, the better the quality of the charcoal, so the greater the blast, right? Any highly flammable organic matter can still be used if you want. Like sulfur is the minor part of the compound. Practically it only acts as a trigger, having a lower flammability temperature than that of saltpeter, and it's mostly, in fact, sulfur that was making that incendiary feature, right, for the earlier firearms, if you can call them, for this mostly incendiary purpose. In ignition of the powder causes the immediate production of gases which multiply the original volume of the mixture to generate the actual explosion. And all apparently simple, really. We are all a bit pyromaniac and obsessed with explosions. I have some anecdotes from my youth, my reckless youth. But I'm really very prudent and cautious. But even I to get something a bit more, psychopathic back in the day, and so it's really all simple, right? It's achievable with materials known, and this is what makes you think historically since ancient times. For example, nitre is described by Pliny the Elder in his Naturalis Historia, and perhaps we have a mention of that even in the Bible. Yet, the way again this mixture would get used militarily, and not just for exploding, but for channeling this energy into, in fact, something that is a weapon and that is effective and cost benefits positive, etc., is tremendously complex, right? The art of harnessing the energy produced by gunpowder to use it effectively in war requires centuries-old process. That's why, again, it's not that somebody invented firearms in the 13th century for the first time. They knew about this, like before. So, like, steam engine existed since classical antiquity, but of course it was inapplicable at that time for the purpose we see in the 18th century. So this is all a process that is also historically impossible to reconstruct in the details, because it was fueled by the minds of countless soldiers, alchemists, inventors, as we will see today. The first reliable recipe, we can say, for gunpowder is famously the one described by the Franciscan friar and English philosopher Roger Bacon. We are in the mid-13th century. In the work is De Secretis Operibus Artis et Naturae. So the secret works of art and nature, which is art meant as technique to a degree. And so it was part of this medieval encyclopedical awareness already. And Bacon provides us, quite interestingly, with the actual doses of the three elements: 7 parts saltpeter, 5 parts coal, and 5 parts sulfur. Bacon himself seemed particularly keen on gunpowder to point out that the compound is well known to all, given the use that was already made of it for intimidating and disturbing purposes. So here we are, with our obsessions throughout history. However, the author also adds that it would be enough to create larger devices with casings made of very solid material to cause serious damage. Right? In other words, he is talking about explosive grenades right? So this consider he's a Franciscan alchemist, right? I already made a video about how the Franciscans had a hell of a strategic culture at the time. Think about John of Plano Carpini Historia Mongolorum, that was specifically not just an ethnographic work, but one commissioned for espionage purposes by Western rulers to sort out, what the Mongol military was actually about. So these guys, remembered, and were rising from, burning Fort Estater, Dionysian, leftistic, extremistic heretics to know how to cope with the most powerful military out there at the time. So they were really a force to be reckoned with. In fact, they would essentially take over universities at that point. But even in Bacon's times, this gunpowder was not being used for the first time. Yet it's only in the first decades of the 14th century that firearms really spread, right? You can't say timidly, it's just our documentation to be timid about that, because again, there wasn't really anything special about that, right? This thing on every school book is presented, oh my god, firearms change everything. At this time, nobody really saw that as a game changer, such, right? There were other gunpowder artilleries that were much more effective and destructive than the firearms, but the latter evidently had a potential that needed to be explored and enacted and applied, and so that's how gradually the development occurred. I made significant amount of videos about 14th, 15th century guns, so if you're interested, we'll keep talking about that as well, for different cultures, right? Mostly the West, but we talk about the Mitfa guns of the Mamluks, whatever. And immediately, I would like to stress that as soon as firearms appear, like they appear every freaking where. For example, in naval warfare, we mentioned the Mamluks, that together with the Venetians were the most advanced in naval technology, in military technology specifically. They used already, we are in the early 14th century, not just grenades, whatever, but torpedoes, like everything they could essentially make work, like this fireworks floating over skimming the sea surface, and so that's how pervasive immediately the technology really was, proving also that its development was timely, like it was just the right moment, which that given the broader background of these civilizations, this guns could be finally employed, and spread. The mere presence of these weapons was enough at a point to force the surrender of fortifications considered impregnable, which doesn't mean that fortresses were impregnable, but they had historically relied on much longer besieging times before falling, and so whenever a gun started being more smashing, sort of accurate enough and available, which was the actually great challenge for the same besiegers, and that's how gradually, in fact, this technology developed. Well, you could really, as it would happen in later centuries, really had to redraw the entire military engineering, the siege warfare, and not just because of that, because of course, again, what really changed was not the type of military architecture, but the availability of resources to build it in a certain way, right? Obviously, Europe was covered in hundreds of castles for hundreds of square kilometers. Well, during the modern age, the smaller, largely smaller fortresses were sort of obsolete, and so you needed to concentrate more resources in a single fortress had to be bigger and thus more sophisticated in proportion, actually costing more. You pass from the Traces Italiennes, and you arrive, of course, to Vauban. These are like during also the 18th, the 19th century. The fortress loses most of its original function strategically by scale, but overall, right, you have also just a different world, like a different politics. You have much more concentrated states. Resources are always there. You see, it's not that firearms could have not been invented before, but again, applicability is different from the invention or the discovery. That is something that actually dates far more obscurely back in time. In Ghent, Flanders, modern armories had been active since 1313, and firearms were used in the siege of Metz in 1323. In Florence, iron balls and, quote, canones were ordered in 1326. Right, everybody is actually starting to use this. You may think that the biggest centers had the greater centralization in the production of these weapons. It's not entirely true. Sometimes you find smaller centers that actually specialize in, say, building cannons or even hiring them in larger quantities compared to their armored forces, albeit mostly because they were used in defense of fortifications and much in field armies that, especially at this point, do not need artillery in large numbers for a practical purpose. In the same 1326, we have the first image of a piece of artillery that we commented on our last video about, in fact, late medieval guns. This piece of artillery is illustrated, famously enough, by the English scholar Walter de Millemate, to, by the way, an exceptional student, to say the least, the future King Edward III, the greatest and most complete English military genius, by far, right? There is no other competitor in this sense. And we see the gun as literally an iron vase from which comes out a heavy arrow shot against the walls of a city. Yes, it's sort of artistically licentious in some way, but it's still meaningful because you can see the gun being triggered by a gunner through a red hot iron inserted into a hole in the device that in fact makes the powder explode and fire the arrow. It's already evident here that this weapon has mostly a siege warfare applicability and function. We will have to talk a lot about pre-gunpowder artillery to explain, well, exactly what the purpose of artillery in siege warfare had been up to that point, what was the actual effectiveness, and for which specific targets and with which specific doctrine. In any case, going back to the illumination of Walter de Millemate, the shape is precisely that of a vase, perhaps because it was familiar to the bell casters that at the time were the only ones who possessed the necessary metallurgical skills to produce such pieces, right? So the cylindrical, or at least the vase shape that stemmed from, again, the same molds that the same vase makers did, but applied, of course, to metal casts, such as the one of the bells, that naturally were also, heavy stuff in terms of knowing how to handle resistance, like elasticities, all things that you really needed for, in fact, channeling the explosion in a functional fashion within these devices. Soon, however, the cannons took on the tubular shape that they still retain, right? Metal bars were welded together around a wooden cylinder, then tightened together by belts, also made of metal, like the staves of a barrel in practice, and there is no doubt that, of course, this was pointing towards a greater range and precision, because that's effectively what the tubular shape does ballistically. Now the bottom was closed by screwing a breech, and from that simple tube, large darts, but also quite soon and more standardly iron and stone bolts continued to be fired. Right, the latter offer the advantage of being able to be prepared directly on the scene of the fight. Really, ammo's never much a greater concern than the explosive. Right, stone cutters had always been there. Medieval warfare, they used pretty similar projectiles. The main problem there was storing and carrying them, if anything, but this is a problem that, generally speaking, weighs together with much greater logistical needs of medieval armies. Think about the ones entailed by heavy cavalry. I made a video recently about the Catholic German artillery of the 6th and the 17th century. You can see literally the cost of the entire, especially the train, that all the people had worked to operate the guns, and also Renaissance logistics as far as artillery was concerned, was really traumatic. It shows all the incredibly violent problems that were connected with moving these artillery packs, that however were so effective by that point, that evidently were all worth it. But the main problem was finding the explosive. For medievals, the greater problem at best had been having a prepared storage of more or less uniformly cut projectiles, right? That some more orderly feudal monarchies like England, for example, seem to have developed quite early in time. The same Edward III's grandfather, Edward I, was apparently going at war with quite sort of centralized arsenals of trebuchet shots. But in fact, it's a much smaller problem by scale than the one would be posed by guns, by gunpowder artillery. The cannon proves so effective, also from a psychological point of view, meaning not the being scared by the explosion, but mostly the fact that it's more the threat mentally posed, so also irrationally posed by the chances of being smashed by a cannon shot, that sort of have greater effect, as always, like any weapon, than the actual physical impact, right? Always bear this in mind, because notoriously, until say the late 19th century, as exemplified also by the First World War, shelling was not the most important part of warfare, right? In many ways, the most destructive, the most traumatic, right? So artillery throughout this early centuries was always incredibly poor in terms of actual people killed, but it could do a lot, especially through ricochet fire in front of the enemy lines, willingly shot shorter, right? Just to watch the soldiers of the first line having this ball bouncing in front of them and freaking out and breaking the formation, so that the most important people would have historically always been the one of the front, that all the others in the file followed would disorder, in fact, all the other guys down, and a few people would actually ever die. By far, the first killer is cold steel, until at least the musket takes over, and definitely cavalry killed more people than guns still in the 18th century. There is no doubt about this. In any case, especially in siege warfare, because that's the first area of employment, as we have seen, smashing the walls, that was the main deal. Guns start being so effective that foundries must respond to the continuous demand for new weapons. And this is when actually the thing starts getting subtle, right? Because individual, say, the traditional communities of medieval Europe could definitely provide with large amounts of these guns, but they would not necessarily standardize them and know how to operate them. They in a collective fashion, and so they need one single authority that centralizes the trains, etc. We've seen this, for example, in the armies of Charles the Bold, right, the Duke of Burgundy. That was, in his time, the most advanced military in Europe, and that was good for many reasons. Also for the abundance of artillery that, however, mostly came from Flanders, that were all scattered communes, basically, and that therefore would produce this sort of many altogether, but still from individual communes, and so not a part of a corps of an artillery park, even though the Dukes of Burgundy would be probably the first ones to gather such forces, much so that it's the French that normally were imitated by the Burgundians in other military matters that come later in this. And France will have soon, by the time of the Italian wars, the largest, most effective artillery park. This is also a very interesting aspect of the story. This applies to armor to some extent in the art of war. Any type of metal and alloy was used for artillery, for the guns. Attention soon focused mainly on bronze and iron. Obviously, the only ones resistant enough to guarantee sufficiently safe and prolonged use over time. All right. So again, you could have done it with other material, but right, there is a doctrine of employment that dictates that. So technology bends to doctrine, right? Not the other way around, right? Tactics make weapons, make technology, not the other way around. And if they do, it's just for a minimal part. So in this, maybe not first, but again, from a 21st century perspective, because we are obsessed with, wrongly with technology, this was the first arms race, right? And in it, the biggest obstacle was sourcing the ingredients for gunpowder, as we were saying before. Certainly not sulfur or charcoal that could be easily found, but saltpeter, right? The best sulfur in Europe came, and still comes from Sicily. They considered that in colonial times, like in the 19th century, all the European armies ruling the world got, I think, 2/3 of their sulfur from the Sicilian mines. The purer the mineral, the easier it is to distill it, to obtain crystals. This is, again, they did it with armor. Think about the Calbis Noricum of the Roman arms and armor. Also the Swedish iron mines, all these very, carbonized to the right degree naturally, right? That made the army also of Gustavus Adolphus its more dynamic use of artillery and so on. So nature, geography, mineral resources of the lands do help a little. In general, sulfur is common, however, in many other areas of Europe. And saltpeter is not, right? It takes years to produce and refine, right? If you have eaten from a short time, like, just stop this video and listen to me at another point. But if you know how saltpeter can be produced, say artificially, but still with natural means, you know what it is about. Essentially, saltpeter spontaneous fluorescence on damp walls, as it was like the most immediate to be found, was insufficient for systematic production. Right, during the French Revolution, when the first mass armies were levied, for example, the Republican government began to impose all the French population to scratch saltpeter from their cellars, walls, etc. And yet it was not enough, quantitatively speaking, but just for saying how desperate you can get for political and military reasons for equipment. For this reason, in the Middle Ages, large quantities of saltpeter were imported from the East. Right? We made a video showing how strong was Western European draw in the international market during the later Middle Ages. So it wasn't actually much of a problem. You see, in fact, Western artillery parks being by the 20s of the 15th century what every updated prince must have to go out to war. Shortly afterwards, however, Europeans learned also how to produce saltpeter in large quantities in the Old World. And it is a laborious process, right? The cultivation beds are composed of decomposing animals and plants, right? They must be soaked in manure and urine, which special workers raid on the farms, often with violent methods, even breaking down the floors of the stables. And this is all a fermentation process, essentially lasting 3 years, during which the putrescent mass must also be continuously turned and aerated, nourished with rubble, ashes, and waste from soap manufacturing. So it's, terrifying. The raw material, however, obtained thus is purified in subsequent washes before being distilled. So again, a very long process. The 3 ingredients of gunpowder must be mixed at a time of use, otherwise they would separate during transportation. The preparation of the mixture is the task of new coteries of highly specialized professionals. Right, the bomb squad and the artillerymen, they know how to read and write. They have skills that extend from mathematics to chemistry to engineering, because very heavy firearms are tied to fixed positions on pads, which must be resistant enough to withstand the very strong recoil. You need all an apparatus of, for example, of pioneers, just to open the way to artillery. You must know the ground. It's all a very empirical work at the beginning, but these specialized professional figures start to emerge, right? And artillery is also a field of great social promotion, because if you get into it, you already know how guns work, and you just learn even subsequently to read and write. That is normally something you already can if you're in that business. You can be promoted quite quickly. That were higher pays, and again, you find even people from relatively humble backgrounds rising to quite prestigious positions thanks to their artillerist skills. We're seeing again in that video about the Catholic artillery of the 30 Years' War. You also need to know how to deploy the guns where they will produce the greatest damage. This is again all the engineering, ballistic. You have to be able to dose the load. So it's all very empirical, meticulous. There is an art, right? This is still a world in the Renaissance where everything is blended in. Occult secrets, right? Alchemy. Like there is a general hype towards the possibility of obtaining this impressive godlike feat. In the song of the British Grenadiers, we really have it laid out quite clearly. Like they said, the great heroes of the past that had never, really been fighting against firearms, which is something much scarier than anything they had at the time. Of course, this is a modernistic mentality that, of course, the ancient heroes were meant to achieve quite supermistic things, but there was a pride almost that is the one that we sort of still have regarding technological accomplishments that also in tradition are considered like if you have more power as a sort of divine blessing, except you have to be able to use it as well, which can in fact in contrary case become quite quickly a curse, which is the Promethean myth. And definitely nuclear weapons are very well here to remind us of that. So also moving artillery is very laborious, so you must have a coup d'oeil in spotting which part of the enemy fortification is the weakest, how the siege is going to evolve. Again, that comes only through sheer experience in many ways. We will surely talk more about this for modern warfare. And in originally, especially, such specialists were not soldiers. Also, there wasn't much of a difference actually between soldiers and civilians. But if we can so more separate the two, like the latter were hired on contract for this purpose, and they were looked at with fear even by ordinary people due to their familiarity with that infernal fire. I mean, objectively was scary. It's just like Smith, like there were all these legends regarding the deeper secrets of this almost magic power. These guys covered in powder and stinking like sulfur, really embodied in a devilish fashion. That's what they believed, and that's why, in fact, they were even discriminated against in some other cultures. I don't know that the Mongols did make an early use of firearms, but also the Ottomans, like they had a core of freemen, of noblemen that were quite Apollonianly chivalric, knightly, and feudal in nature. And of course, look at these artillerists, like the Janissaries, or whoever fought on foot, as it was mostly the case, as just subhumans that, of course, had emerged, crawled out of the gates of hell, right in the bellies of the earth, because that's what you deal with. You deal with the dirt, right? Whereas the entire aristocratic world is based on heavenly accomplishments of highly spiritual nature, and that's why it's scary. Like when you look at Bayard or Ariosto, to realize how even the death of great warriors by just, I don't know, having the spine broken by a falconet shot, but was pretty severely traumatic in a cultural sense. Like, we have awakened forces we should have not, right? It was an idea that we're toying with, even though still as humans pursuing the same because of their sinful nature, as an auxilium of the devil that really disrupted the world at that point, right? Allowed for further expansion, but it also broke the spiritual internal unity in the same generations. So it's that is really interesting in general, like to think anthropologically. You also, as an artillerist, know like to cooperate with other figures, like soldiers, foundrymen, and artillerymen have to really have a great relation to produce increasingly effective, lethal, and specialized weapons. And from these guys' genius, talent, or sheer instinct of survival, even by accident, you would have impressive, in fact, guns specialization, squat curved mortars, the gigantic bombards for sieges, the more agile culverines, the falcons and falconets for a more tactically dynamic use. So there is a creative effervescence with admittedly lethal aims, which gave results that were sometimes bizarre, but mostly functional and extremely ingenious. We will see that before the 17th century, you don't have really a full standardization, or at least you can standardize some pieces at that point. But even later, like the availability of guns is another thing. You would have all the maybe in a royal armory you could reach quite high level of standardization, but what you would confiscate in enemy territory of guns that were from generations before, like, still would do, right? And so that posed other issues and required some other competences and so on. In the 15th century, the Louvre were introduced. These were pins extending along the sides of the barrel, fixing it to the carriage. So finally, the shot can be raised at will. Furthermore, by equipping the carriages with wheels, the artillery is given initial mobility. During the same period, the granulation of gunpowder was discovered. This was the most important technological innovation in firearms technology until the introduction of the bayonet, which is, okay, admittedly not gunpowder technology, but still connected, of course, with the combined role that the musket that it has with the musket. The Ottomans are credited to be at least the ones who made the more effective use of such granulation, even that started it on a larger scale. In fact, the myth that the Ottomans would have technologically gone down during the 16th to 17th century is not, especially over to Europe, is not really correct, right? Europe was a more advanced civilization, but as always, it's not technology that makes it so, right? Europeans had surely an impressive, they were more technically advanced to some degree, but when you look at the quality of firearms, right, you can believe the Feldmarschall Montecuccoli after the Battle of St. Gotthard that saved Vienna to prepare the defenses for the 20 years old later siege of 1683. That capturing the Ottoman St. Barbara, at least from a Catholic perspective, look at this powder and said, this is of the finest type, right? And if he said it, we can absolutely believe it. So we are, again, in the second half of the 17th century. Evidently, the Ottomans had not fallen that back yet in terms of at least quality of the powder. That was essentially the most important thing to make firearms in general more effective, mostly artillery in this case. How did you granulate gunpowder? Well, essentially you would wet it, dry it into sheets, and then ground it into grains. What's the purpose of that? Is that you have all tiny balls that, when are all together in the load, will allow, in fact, sacs of oxygen to pass among these little spheres more easily, and so oxygenating faster the powder, and at the ignition making it explode much more effectively, right? It also allows gunpowder to be transported ready for use, which had not been the case, as we've seen before. You needed to combine it on the spot. At this point, gunpowder becomes more uniform, better flammable, and so you really have a further development in firearms effectiveness. Precisely in this period, that is, towards the end of the Middle Ages, the recipe for gunpowder was perfected, stabilizing around proportions that were affected, in fact, by these refinements, and would remain valid for the following 4 centuries, right? This tells you how essentially by the end of the Middle Ages you had pretty much the same, most of what you know about artillery history already laid out there. And compared to Bacon's formula, the quantities of sulfur and coal were reduced to the advantage of saltpeter, right? So you have some sort of more lively powder, more explosive capacity, leaving also fewer dangerous unburned residues in the barrel, right? There were guys who had to scratch the surface, and they were very careful, of the barrel to enter without any piece of metal, because any spark could literally make them explode inside the barrel. Things were complicated. Today we do not digress too much on also the great dangers that artillerists regularly underwent in operating these guns. It could overheat, explode, like a King of Scotland was killed like that, of course by a friendly gun. Just think about also Orban, the siege of Constantinople, his monster gun was also his hand. So a pioneeristic technology and field of development, if you want. And you know how this wouldn't stop anyone, right, for pursuing the ultimate goal. The 100 Years' War 1337, 1453, just for, repetita iuvant, the Latins said, between France and England, was the first to see extensive use of artillery. Why? Because France and England were the most fully fledged monarchical states, and as such they had a great capacity of power concentration. Together with that, some early also again infrastructural capacity and provisioning availability to field larger quantities of artillery. Some say that the very first use of artillery on the battlefield was that of Edward III at Crécy. As we've seen before with his entourage, he was no stranger to artillery up to that point. It's just anecdotal because, again, Crécy is such an important battle. In general, the bombers shot there were really not making a difference what happened on that battlefield in 1346, but it's at least fair to say that this is the first major battle in which we can witness, a significant artillery use, which is also not quite, the normality in a greater sense, meaning that pitched battles would see the use of artillery for that specific tactical situation. But again, the guns were mostly used in siege warfare. It is true that also artillery in general, we tend to think just being about siege warfare and before the firearms came around. It's not entirely true. That they were, contrary to there is a very popular opinion that says, oh my god, they used catapults in battles, it was normal because it's Middle Ages. No, that's not the case. But also the idea that catapults or any kind of artillery was used just in siege warfare is technically not correct. If anything, also because they moved from siege to siege, as medieval warfare was about, and meeting sometimes, of course, in the middle ground, or more preferably at the actual siege for a open field engagement, was making them use the guns, the artillery that they brought with themselves. Some was mounted locally, but there were lots of ballistas, lots of other artillery that, again, the pieces that were used also in open field much more than we think. Just they were smaller and so more similar to crossbows. But again, I'm not going to digress even on this. During the 14th to 15th century, you do have significant use of artillery also in important quantities. I think in general the watershed, however, by scale, is the Italian campaign of the French King Charles VIII, 1494-1497. That is the first, the beginning of the Italian wars, and at that point you have the full might of the French crown reunited after the 100 Years' War and further consolidated. It really shows you what a state like France can put together in terms of an artillery park. And here we're talking about 300 pieces, of which 70 siege units, units which constitute the heart of the invasion army, or at least actually the core was, of course, the cavalry, the infantry. But this stuff was enough to make the French king passing across the peninsula, dotted by, severely fortified city-states, almost unopposed, because the firepower of these guns was unprecedented. And put it all together, it's not that France was particularly more technologically advanced than even the same Italy. Actually, at this point, the more technologically advanced countries in Europe are Italy and Germany. They are more politically fragmented. They would become the so-called weak areas of Europe. But it's also quantities of value, right? And France, of course, these countries are somehow similar, but there is no doubt that in spite the Italians or the Germans having sort of better artillery, more ideas, more, as we'll see now, just know-how. Think about Leonardo and artillery intuitions, etc. Still, well, he would go from Tuscany to Milan to France. So showing actually that what I was saying, that he who has more power in general can field also some of the more punching force, regardless of the technological advancement per se. And of course, there aren't, by our time standards, significant technological differences in late 15th century Europe, especially in the West, but by design, by concept, really anywhere, right? And by the end of the Italian Renaissance wars, the lines of development, technologically and tactically, for the use of artillery have been already mapped, laid out, right? What artillery would essentially remain conceptually is there by this time. So we had to conceptualize what by the 15th century artillery had been like. Imagine like the breech button having this function of facilitating the raising of a battle. Then the order onto the button proceeded the loading sequence. Naval guns were equipped with 4 small wheels because the piece did not require many movements. It only had to be free to move forwards and backwards. They had only one place where they could lodge it, differently from, in fact, land warfare. Until the second half of the 19th century, the cannons would be also muzzle-loaded, including the enormous ones mounted on the large gunboats. So think about that. The rapid introduction of gunpowder and cannon exerted in itself, again, was prompted by the Renaissance, but it also really exerted a formidable stimulus to the same, and to the scholars that were investigating theoretically and practically this great polymaths of Western civilization, the capacities of the potential of these guns. The alchemists of previous centuries had already been able, as we've seen, to deliver the Renaissance scholars with a weapon of enormous power, not only on the battlefield, but also for the suggestion it could exert on creative minds. And so Leonardo da Vinci himself produced studies worthy of his genius on ballistics, siege techniques, and even went so far as to design a predecessor of the tank, notoriously, and many other, again, fantastic inventions that make us say, look, this guy had seen it all before. Again, if you think about that, it's not usual, also because most people at the time did not really have a theoretical insight, and even less the capacity of experimenting on this. But of course, it shows you how there is some conventionally logical and rational way of seeing how things can evolve to some extent. Leonardo's ability to observe is exceptional, to say the least. He managed to fix the flight path of explosive mortar projectiles, right? The Tuscan genius went further. He also hypothesized the first example of carpet bombing, achieved using the tooth ring that orients the elevation of the piece. But this is, think about it, it's shocking. The precision of the cocking was crucial to obtain a truly effective shot, right? It was, for many centuries, one of the major problems faced by ballistic experts. So, again, problems that throughout the centuries had already been envisaged and that only gradually could be just solved from a technical point of view, but very often also because there were simpler and yet more effective means to go with more primitive weapons that, however, were cost-benefit ratio more convenient at a certain point. Right, it's just like the musket that essentially evolved from mobile artillery rather than from a handgun. I found it there. Sometimes you have an heterogeneous of the ends, like, for example, the development of naval artillery went in parallel with the increasing of the tonnage. Right, if there hadn't been the age of explorations, if Europe had not control so much traffics and cargoes were not that heavy, like even the development of artillery on board would have been more complicated. Inertia had not allowed the these guns recoil to be absorbed more effectively without even moving the ship too much around. So it's all a series of, you see, they began with cannons simply installed in previous designs. We were talking about it the other day, and speaking of galley warfare, then the Swedes began for the first time in history in the 16th century to design ships properly for cannon integration on them structurally. So things began really to change at many levels. They were especially being harnessed here by a very hierarchical society as the one that of the ancien regime that was coming out of the Middle Ages. And so again, everything is a reflection of so many different factors, even though there are, as we were just saying, some core ones that you need to address in the essential of the technology. Artillery must offer its unsurpassed destructive force in military operations, integrating with other weapons as well. We see it on the battlefield. Artillery is never decisive. At this point, it's all about, pike and shot capacity, and the shot prevalently being handgunners, right? But still, it accompanies that, right? This is true also on siege warfare in general. You need still a force that must, of course, assault the fortifications. There is actually a staticization of siege warfare during the 16th and the 17th century, because new designs of military architecture, such as the Trace Italienne, manage to lower the destructive potential of this early artillery to a degree that in fact makes siege warfare a longer, more complicated thing than it had even been before, to some extent. Of course, depend relatively to the new type of fortification, which is in fact the main change there. So then also certain fringes parts of Europe take a much longer time to evolve in that direction, right? So that you could have found some medieval looking castles even in very sort of late modern contexts, because maybe the local powers there had not made it to bring enough firepower, or the ones they had was still sort of enough to cope at a balanced level, considering again the available resources for the local rulers. In any case, artillery must become more mobile, quicker to fire, more powerful and deadly. These still rudimentary weapons could only fire a few shots a day. There was some suspense regarding the moment, right? There were these mantlets that were rising by surprise, and then they shot. But they knew more or less. They were usually punctual, right? They distributed the shots during the day, and their purpose being, in fact, quite methodically and patiently to tear down particular structures, and not like the entire fortification, because otherwise fortifications would have disappeared overnight, which is not what happened. Also, that type of artillery would have not been exactly the same later on. And still, at this point, the later Middle Ages, you could relatively easily rebuild part of the defenses. There are really epic sieges throughout all the Renaissance that lasted forever. Think about the one of Candia, Crete, decades even. So, again, artillery is not decisive. It's not really meant or thought or hoped or dreamt to be, right? In spite of this very slow rate of fire, every army held artillery in the highest regard. It was literally a pride about this firepower. For the cannon to become lethal, a technological leap in metallurgy was needed, which only would arrive in the 16th century, at least lethal in a sense of some sort of more versatile employment and trying to make things more dynamic. Also on the in open field. And only at that point can cannons in fact be made in a single casting as well. The result is a more robust weapon with a smoother barrel and therefore of a caliber closer to that of bullets in some instances. And this produces less gas dispersion. So in technical terms, the wind during the explosion, and a more powerful and precise shot. This was, of course, an important concern. The same caliber as in the past, the cannons could by then be lighter, required less charge to express the same power as the old weapons. So it's not much about the size, even though that did matter to some extent, because there had always been some monster weapons, but for them that would have hundreds of smaller ones, right? For all the different tactical employments, the largest ones in guns, of course, being about siege warfare, but there would be countless of other circumstances in which you could start using them effectively also in open field. The improvement of siege artillery showed, starting from the 15th century, the inadequacy of the older castle walls, which were, as you know, thin and vertical. They had developed like that during the feudal age. And starting from the following century, architects designed the new star fortresses with thicker and more inclined walls to better resist the firepower of the modern howitzers. By the way, one of the most beautiful examples in absolute terms of this type of fortress is the one of Palmanova that I advise you to search the satellite image of. Like, this fortress was built by the Venetians in 1593 and sort of represents one of the most Renaissance geometric, but also technically and engineering insightful expressions of the trace italienne. As we were saying before, paradoxically, this brings as a of course, war tends towards symmetry, right? So guns alone could not make it. Heavy artillery is still very static in general, and these new fortifications force it to be so, even not prompting the tactical need for them to be more readily deployable, because again, these sieges last forever, and things go at their pace, right? However, the other lighter artillery can get closer to the infantry now and support their fort even in attack, not just in defense, right? And you have all different crazy experimentations. For example, in Moscow, on the Red Square, you can see that the enormous bombard commissioned by Tsar Fyodor I in 1586. It's almost 6 meters long. It weighs 38 tons. It's the largest bronze howitzer ever made. So it's been nicknamed also the Tsar of Cannons. And during the 1980 restorations, traces of gunpowder emerged, which means that the bombard was found in real use, right? Many Tsars were sort of obsessed with explosives. I mean, even the terrible apparently like to tie up people with explosive and making them blow up. It seems that not much has changed among Russian rulers' deviations. In any case, the standardization of calibers and models was also kicking in to some degree. Before, it would have been nothing short of a mirage, because, as we've seen, it's in spite of the further concentration in the production of guns, most of them were really gathered from a bit like the entire country, the city, arsenals, or whatever. There was a great random variety you could find. Cannon foundries had to cope with a large number of requests of all kinds, by the way, so much so that over time they transformed their workshops into truly complex pre-industrial ones. The production of large guns remained, however, substantially artisanal activity for a long time, with all the resulting advantages and disadvantages. Churning out cannons in series with the same characteristics and above all with perfectly identical calibers was impossible. Each weapon was a unique piece, different from all the others, because the mold was lost during casting, meaningfully enough. So in the 17th century, you have However, the skill of these artisans already reaching levels of excellence and surprising results. The workshops of the Swedish king Gustavus Adolphus, 1594-1632, were capable of producing cannons with differences in effective caliber less than 2%, which is really amazing. Again, this doesn't mean that all, for example, Gustavus Adolphus' guns on the battlefield were alike at all, but the states that are forming this crucial moment, like towards the mid of the 17th century, especially the from that point onwards, like Western warfare really takes off. I mean, if you really want to spasmodically use the term revolution, use it for the period immediately afterwards, what is being called the actual military revolution, because that's with Louis XIV, and made a video about his army, when things really take off, right? I made multiple videos on Gustavus Adolphus' military innovations. I explain a bit there why this caliber standardization was happening, especially at the smaller level, but not only, right? There were 3 types, and for all the different tactical functions, but of course the smaller ones were also the more used, and in fact the main achievements were meant to be properly in the open field situation, right? We will make specifically a video on the Swedish artillery of Gustavus Adolphus. But even in this case, it's not much about the technology. Again, there is nothing revolutionary about this. Some guns were even short and made smaller, right? Just because they were functional to a new type of doctrine that emphasized small unit tactics. So it's not much any greater technological advancement in itself at all. Much more was done, for example, by the great simplification in the logistical apparatus, and so just administration. Right, consider that up to the army of Louis XIV, nobody had ever, like for the entire army, ever had a bureau that would simply calculate how much supplies were needed just to feed the army. Right, and the reason why this starts happening is that armies were becoming bigger. So as always, everything, even technically speaking, is bent to this major. At the end of the day, to moral force, if you think about that. Of course, there is also a problem of material availability, but you're going to find that, right? Just like these guys had literally created now the fact of passing to even the spread of firearms at every level, also the prevalence among the infantry in the second half of the 17th century. So it's sheer will to power, in a way or another. So the 17th century brought with it the first scientific studies on ballistics, importantly enough, conducted by François Blondel, 1686, that if you look at the frontispiece of his work, L'art de jeter les bombes, the art of throwing bombs, and there is a guy, they inserted this in the pictures, that jumps around. There are all guns around. It's just like a party, like of how let's learn how to throw bombs. Blondel applied, by the way, the theories expressed by the Italian scientist Galileo Galilei on the laws of movement to artillery. Gravitation, etc. These are, think about the accomplishments of Kepler, of Newton. We are all in the proceeding with this also great discoveries, great mathematical formulations. For example, the French mathematician Bernard Forêt de Belidor publishes in 1731. Now we're speeding up because I was more interested in the beginning. That towards the end here we will just look at something else. Also, European guns technology all standardized very much. All right, so there are less systemic variation from especially one contender to another. The work of Forêt de Belidor is titled Le Bombardier Français, so the French gunner, or artillerist if you prefer, containing the first ballistic tables with which he, in fact, mathematically demonstrates that the charges in use at the time are too powerful. In fact, they were wasting black powder unnecessarily and prematurely wear out the cannons. This is something they may have not just empirically noticed until they had more precise calculations on. So the giants of the Great War, with half a charge, the cannons can be even lighter. Everything becomes more efficient, as we've seen. With half a charge, the cannons can be even lighter, more mobile, quicker to load. The Swiss Jean Maritz and the French Jean de Courbeval, respectively 1680, 1343, and 1715, 1789, contributed notoriously as largely to this process. Right? I mean, the Courbeval system is pretty much path opening, saying Napoleon was born out of that fundamentally as an artillerist. As they introduced the technique of building cannons by boring, like the hole produced during casting made the correspondence even more precise between the walls of the barrel and the ball. Prior to this, there were very empirical systems like sticking pieces of ceramic just to adjust, like to compress like the shot as much as the load inside the barrel, making thickness so that again the explosion could just push much more on the projectile or the other way around. There were again very empirical means. I made a video about this. I think it's artillery innovation in the 18th century. It gives you an idea how still artisanal warfare was by this point. Also because this is when the industrial, let's call it revolution, kicks in, right? Before it was all much more, it was a different world, just in terms of pieces availability, of reuse, and so on. The Courbeval system stemmed, by the way, from the full might and power of the incredibly high quality standards of the French Royal Army that was basically the strong, the one more vastly ahead in terms of continentally hegemonic strategy needs, etc. So this that it was about standardization of the caliber, something we'll look at the Courbeval system as a whole, right? But it brought to a decisive lightening of the weapon and provided Napoleon Bonaparte with the agile and powerful tool he needed for his aggressive tactics that in turn were in fact capable of, say, weaponizing these weapons in a much more effective way. As you know, only in the Napoleonic era did infantry, cavalry, and artillery come to effectively amalgamate. We talked a lot about this, not just in the von Clausewitz series, but also in the few videos we made specifically on Napoleonic, properly Napoleon's contribution to the art of war. So Carlo Maria Bonaparte had destined his son Napoleon for a military career by sending him, not yet 10 years old, to the military school of Braine-le-Château, where the boy attracted the attention of his superiors already at the time for his mathematical skills. At 15, Napoleon entered the Royal Military School in Paris, where he attended the artillery course, the discipline most suitable for young people with a strong aptitude for calculation. As you know, Napoleon had a very bold character. He also liked mathematics, and the following year he obtained the rank of lieutenant. On September the 1st, 1785, he entered the ranks of the 1st Battalion of the 1st French Artillery Regiment. Thus began a special relationship with the cannons, as you understand, which were led to lead him to the imperial throne, practically on the wings of many victories. Again, it was not just artillery, but you know what Napoleon's deal was, tactically speaking. He his coup d'oeil allowed him to identify the exact point of the opposing line against which to unleash the rain of fire from his artillery, and the task of which was often to cause confusion among the enemy ranks, while they waited that the cavalry made a decisive charge. This was the actual, of course, it's a combined arm tactics. It's not artillery that causes the that is decisive. It's not. It's infantry, as a matter of fact. Cavalry is more important than artillery, and so if you soften up the enemy, specifically one section of the line, you can overwhelm with the shocking force. Yeah, and this came to a degree that had never been experimented, especially against the masses, like the new armies, how they were being unprecedentedly seen on the battlefields as a reaction. As here we're talking from the French side, but of course also the armies countering the revolutionary ones had to take on that sort of mass scale, otherwise it would have been knocked out. And so it was a completely different way of war, and as we know, it was also rougher, right? Less apparently orderly than what 18th century warfare at least has been depicted to us. But that was also the way to make war, and so this massive punch with artillery pounding at the enemy lines, followed by this shocking charge, and then of course the infantry advancing, mostly having that steamrolling, much more, let's say, attritional and frictional and persistent capacity, were part of the maximization of combined arms tactics that again in artillery that artillery had never been integrated in. For example, intense artillery fire began the battle, right? Cannons are rarely used in counter battery, that is, against enemy artillery, because the effect would be so insignificant as to be considered a waste of ammo, right? The purpose was mostly not even killing people, it was scaring them to death, and breaking the formation before the actual shot hit. In fact, again, it was preferable to not to shoot into the actual enemy ranks, because the guys in the first lines were the most important would have simply not seen their comrades behind them exploding to pieces, and it would have just maintained that front. Instead, it was better for these guys to freak out seeing the ball bouncing just in front of them, and for them having the actual time of getting out of the way to disrupt the entire formation that then could be charged, for example. Well, this was done since ever, all armies did, but Napoleon maximized this on a collective scale of unprecedented level. And again, infantry or cavalry formations were the favorite targets of the Napoleonic artillerymen. The best way to hit was also transversely, not from the front, if you wanted at least to hit the entire formation, because at some point it would happen. It's not that the ricochet fire was preferential in absolute terms, but again, if you really want to knock out people, you have to, of course, trying to shoot at the point in which they were the deepest, even irregularly, against columns, but especially geometrically from the corner of the rectangle throughout the diagonal line. And you would have, with lucky shots, even dozens of people smashed to pieces by a single cannonball. But again, that was not so important as to the general disorder and psychological effect this could entail. You can technically, if there is a rocky ground, I don't know, a ball with that force can hit the terrain, and essentially having the same effect of a grenade, throwing all the shells of the stones around, maiming people around. But it's just not always the option, and still artillery does not have that general meaning. You concentrate fire, you have this great disorderly area and you try to exploit it tactically if you can, then you can't always do that or succeed in it in the first place. So we can say that at this point the parable of the cannon reaches its peak. Armies finally have the much desired instrument at their disposal, capable of moving on the ground in cooperation with other weapons to concentrate in a precise point and at a desired moment a destructive power that, again, does not decide battles but helps deciding them with the combined arms. It is the Gribeval who had proposed also the lighter, more resistant carriages, which horse-mounted artillerymen can even carry following the cavalry squadrons, supporting their action with close-range fire. Right? If you manage to assist infantry with firepower, with artillery and cavalry charge, well, that's the general purpose, right? Because at that point you are going to be decisive against an enemy who does not, right? It's rare to find a situation in which you use all the three arms effectively and the enemy doesn't quite do the same and wins anyway, right? This, of course, is relative also to the broader forces involved, the terrain and everything, but the purpose is harmonizing the cooperation between the three arms. You realize how artillery is becoming, thus in a tactical sense, in open field, much more dynamic than it has ever been. There is the concept of vouloir, for example, the Piedmontese artillery of the Risorgimento was called flying artillery, and it is so you see there is no revolution, right? It's more like a constant development. Not even evolution is correct, because it sounds too teleological, too deterministic, as if artillery was to be developed just in one way, right? There is a part of it that is true, but it's something we think conventionally because that's how eventually the world that we know today that developed like, right? So it's literally something that gets non-deterministically in fact modified to reach a certain function that is dictated by factors that are in fact outside the same. And if you think about that, it's not because I'm a medievalist and so I'm biased by background. It all seems to have already been written since the Middle Ages. It's not a banal, say, it's a simple concept, let's put it this way, but it seems to be real, right? Artillery has just as well, it's old enough, it has almost 800 years, at least in a practical, widespread sense, right, of scale. It's a parable, if you want, that over the course of mostly, really, at least in the way we intend, 6 centuries perhaps we can say, leads to directly to the Myth-Grinder of Verdun, 1916, and this, the Battle of Annihilation planned by the German general Erich von Falkenhayn, that from February the 21st to December the 19th that year took the lives of 300,000 soldiers. Right. Speaking of offensives and the means at disposal, it's like the wounded counted nearly 1 million, and we thought to have left those days behind, but so it's not yet. But of course, we never do. But this one still shows you how the past was much more determined and even more, even with less means, like the interest of quality, but still capable, strong-willed to achieve that, right? And I talk about Verdun because aside from the fact that, again, I want to make some video about Verdun, for example, starting from I already made some videos about 20th century warfare, but there are not that many. Well, that carnage was carried out mostly by means of gigantic cannons, right, created by the Krupp Steel Works, the most modern and largest in the world at the time. So the best steel and the latest generation explosives basically were collecting nothing more than the lethal legacy of those obscure sort of dirty, underworldly foundrymen of many centuries before. Right, we're in the same reality. At the beginning of the 20th century, the recoil recovery mechanism had, evolved as they initially were. Say that there was just a simple spring which proved too fragile that they were replaced by adjustable air and oil systems. So you have a steel tooth called the plowshare, which is very sturdy, and it is planted in the ground to reduce the recoil when the cannon is fired, and takes its name from the, in fact, part of the agricultural plow of the same name. So you see even how different millennia-old concepts are just reintroduced to make something that, after all, is very conceptually simple, adapt to the new situation. The mobility of an artillery piece becomes even one of the fundamental characteristics. The wheels had to be solid and capable of operating over an uneven terrain, and from the Napoleonic era, that arms interaction between infantry, cavalry would be fading, okay, but still you find it, especially until World War II, here and there. But a never more effective integration of the arms at your disposal. Now there is the air as well, for example. So it's we'll not talk about tanks, artillery, all this stuff, like, that really naval artillery that really deserve different videos. This is just like again a minimally short introduction to a bit I do not digress too much now on the human implications of this, whatever. There is an archetypal symbolism and meaning in all this. Like, it's not just like the development of artillery, something detached from the dehumanization, let's say the degeneration of mankind, let's put it in this way, and the greater undisciplined exaltation of, say, mechanic forces, some sort of agent that can't carry out things for you. That becomes actually just the war destroyer in autopilot, right? And that's where we're getting quite fast. So there is a millenary symbolism and sense in all this that is quite scary to think about. That artillery is perhaps depending on what it shoots, arguably, of course, the least of our problems among this military range. But there is always, of course, a moral dimension to science. So even technological evolution comes with the recognition of somebody's limits and the fact that this thing is not really going by itself. You always have to keep it going, and you can't really defy, at least if not by transcending your own humanity, the second law of thermodynamics, right? So this is never by itself. There's no such thing like artificial intelligence. There is just, in fact, an artificial let's say, presumption that things we all act as if there was another agency out there, but it's always about us at the end of the day, and you can't really jump around that, right? The progress of artificial intelligence is nothing in comparison to that, and it will always be, despite of, again, what a generation of transhuman, but in a self-destructive, say, humanly destructive sense, not in a divinely transcending way. Kids is now completely incapable of even thinking as a reality. So we have to be extremely careful about, let's say, even the way we teach history, like the one of artillery, because even in something so apparently innocent like using the term revolution, there is a complete alienation from reality, from the world, and that does not belong to strategic culture, to military history, to a generally informed educational philosophy. And I think the history of the art of war is really one of those fields that really opens your mind in a way that you didn't really think it was possible, and it leads you somewhere that you cannot quite explain, if not, I think, with some spiritual, religious approach, which is also what it brought me to, right? Many people think that I make these videos because I'm sort of indoctrinated to some extent, but it's the opposite, right? I came to build a doctrine on the basis of the evidence that I found. So I find myself very comfortable morally as scientifically, because the complexity of the world reading has done nothing but increasing. It's rather the persistence in this analysis that makes you more capable of, and more confident in what the evidence actually shows. So it's difficult to explain it to someone who's not on the other side yet, and so I make these videos with some sort of apparently innocent, let's say, at least disclosure approach, which is actually often not even just that, methodologically or analytically, or even just by topic and by just my background. But right, there is always a purpose behind that, and that purpose very often is esoteric to some extent. It's not there. I mean, it is there, but you can't quite see it if you do not get particular lenses, and so that's the actual challenge. It's all about your mind. You ultimately are responsible for the capacity of seeing it, and that always comes with a cost, right? But what we can get, hopefully, is more, right? And this is not perhaps the moment to digress on this. In any case, we will keep talking about artillery. This was just like a sort of broader introduction. We should make even similar things, but of course we will do more in-depth stuff, more than else, really. For today, however, I stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. As always, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time, and see you next time. Bye.